Hello Chipmunk and Chipette fans, my name is Grandy Tamayas, and welcome back to another installment of Alvin and the Chipmunks Elaborations. Today's topic will be, does the 2015 Alvin and the Chipmunks series give too much focus to the human characters? Before I begin, I just want to mention that I have recently passed 1,500 subscribers. Thank you to all of those who have contributed to this milestone. It means a lot that so many of you enjoy the content that I make. Let's get that subscription up to 2,000 next, and I might do an even more special Chipmunk video. Anyway, on to the elaboration. So when you think of human characters in this franchise, chances are you'll automatically think of David Seville first, as well as perhaps Miss Miller, Ian Hawke if you grew up on the Fox films, and Claudia and Klaus Furstein from The Chipmunk Adventure. In the 2015 series, though, only those first two characters exist. The rest are all completely original. Some of the more prominent ones are Miss Smith, Miss Croner, Kevin, Cheesy, and Officer Dangus. And there are some that are slightly less prominent but still frequent, like Derek, Bo Carter and his family, Principal Meadows, Coach Dobkins, this drama teacher Mr. Dodson.
Dodson, we've got Dodson here!
And a bunch of stereotypical Valley girls. At times, there are even episodes that have been focused on some of these characters. But the thing is, I find most of these types of characters and their showcase stories very uninteresting. For one thing, this series is called Alvin and The Chipmunks. It's not that the humans take away from the involvement of the main characters. My issue is that they interrupt the momentum of the story pushed by the main characters, both on an overall series level and in individual episodes. As an example of this, the back end of Season 5 had several episodes where Cheesy appeared a lot, and the show attempted to give him some plot relevance. Even in the last episode, for now at least, the tour, he has a running gag where he tries to go on tour with the Chipmunks and Chipettes as an assistant. Thankfully, they leave him behind, so if we do get a tour season that follows up from these events, we can finally have a break from him. Second, these characters don't have enough depth to make me feel invested in them and their relationships with the Chipmunks and Chipettes, if you can even call some of these relationships. This is something compounded by other issues with the show, like inconsistent characterization, formulaic endings, and the lack of centralization with plot goals. But even on its own, you can tell the humans don't have enough substance to fill the better part of 11 minutes. There have been a few outliers, though, which so far haven't reappeared outside of maybe background cameos, like Anita in Talking Teddy's Revenge, Russell in House Pest, King Geeknerd, Dr. Hayward in Unsend, and those two music executive people who created the Hipmunks, which they show them escaping at the end of We're the Chipmunks as if it were some kind of setup for a later episode, but that hasn't been revisited yet. It's one thing to have almost no inter-episode continuity, but having an ending tease as if there will be and not revisiting it, it's kind of frustrating, especially when I like those first episodes that set them up. I think Anita was the best of these CGI series one-off characters because she actually cared about what the Chipmunk characters, particularly Alvin and Theodore, were doing. Compare that to the Valley girls who hang out near Brittany and always say, like. They do not have any reason to be there other than making the school look actively filled with people, and even that's debatable. And you can tell they genuinely don't care about the Chipettes on a personal level. I get that kind of characterization was probably intentional, but look at this example from My Sister the Weirdo. Just look how uninterested they are at Brittany being regretful about leaving Jeanette out of her popular kids' party. Compare this to the 60s, and especially the 80s cartoons, where, yes, there were a few humans who appeared more than once, like Sam Valiant and Uncle Adventure, but the vast majority were one-off characters who never appeared again, like Digby and Wings Walker in Wings Over Siesta Grande, Mickey from Lucko the Chipmunks, Olivia, Eva, and Miss Grudge from the Chipette story, Miss Stone in Romancing Miss Stone, and Marcia as well as her kids from Dave's Getting Married, although she was actually mentioned a few episodes before in Grounded Chipmunk. Honestly, I don't feel like any of these humans overstayed their welcome, and it made their appearances in the show more memorable. That said, I wouldn't mind some of these characters being reincarnated for the CGI series or a future reboot. Like the humans from the Chipette story, if we ever get a retelling of that origin. Or Digby, I think he's kinda underrated since he went searching for an ancient chipmunk civilization. And that's another thing. I believe in addition to the limited screen time of these human characters, they were also memorable because they were very specialized for the roles that they had. Like, who else could serve as an intimidating authority figure that the Chipettes have to rise up against the way that Miss Grudge does? Whereas Miss Smith Yeah, she's often associated with the school setting and those plots, but there are several times where we've seen her outside of school, like Guitar Hero. Also, because of how irritating she can be, I think she could have just been shown to exist at the school instead of taking active story roles, and only have the assignments she gives be the actual conflict to Alvin. I know that kind of removes the dynamic of Alvin being a troublemaker at the school, but I just really hate hearing Miss Smith's voice when she nags. At the very least, they could have had her lighten up and not be as hard on Alvin in the later seasons, but that's wishful thinking, and again, it removes the dynamic and the status quo nature of the series. But getting back on track, there's also the matter of why the franchise changed in this regard. Why was there a shift between the one-shot characters of the older cartoons and the reoccurring characters of the CGI series? Well, I think it very likely has to do with the cost of making CGI models for new human characters. Traditional 2D animation had to be drawn from scratch almost every time, so what was the point of keeping minor characters around on a regular basis? You could just write a new character to fit the specific role your episode needs, since you're going to draw new animation cells anyway. Whereas with 3D animation, you can use the same model throughout an entire episode or series, but because of how much it costs to make new models from scratch, and how many of them a computer can render in a 3D space, you're usually limited on how many you can produce. As a result, a lot of the crowd-filling scenes also have characters who are duplicates of each other, just with different colors or a few slight physical alterations. Like this girl, Chloe, who is a recolored Annie, and this kid who is a recolored Cheesy. Now, this can work to a benefit, as it forces the writers to account for this budget issue and write characters to be more complex and multidimensional, since they're going to be on-screen longer, and it'd be really boring if they didn't have more things to do or sides of their personality to show off during that time. The problem with Alvin and the Chipmunks is the writers most of the time don't know how to do this with characters who aren't the Chipmunks, the Chipettes, and Dave, and even with those, they have their problems. A lot of these humans only have one main trait to their personalities, yet are put into situations where those traits aren't useful, and you get them bumbling around until they happen to resolve a plot. Kevin, Cheesy, and Officer Dengus have it the worst of this treatment. To be fair, the Alvin and the Chipmunks franchise has always had a very small core cast to begin with, and in the case of the CGI series, an even smaller number of voice actors, which also contributes to this problem. But with the frequency at which these minor characters appear, it really makes me wish that we focused on the Chipmunk characters more. I'm going to give some examples of episodes that were good, and where the Chipmunks and Chipettes mostly or completely drove the plot. Sister Act was all about Alvin's conflict with Eleanor moving in, and featured no humans aside from Dave. Mutiny is another Season 1 episode that heavily involves Eleanor, and even though they do have to compete against a human soccer team, we don't actually get to know any of those characters. The episode focused on the internal struggles of the Chipmunks and Chipettes, and the differing ways that they were training for the game. Or how about my favorite episode, Treasure Hunt? Aside from establishing the map and treasure, Miss Croner wasn't that relevant to the episode. It was really about Alvin and how he led the others to find the treasure. And what little involvement Miss Croner had in the episode actually built on her as a character in an interesting way by showing that she had a husband. Honestly, that and the part where she offers Alvin her old doll as a fair slice of the treasure really made me like Miss Croner in this episode. She's definitely not Miss Miller from the 80s series, but I think this is an example of how to do it right. But unfortunately, moments like these are hard to come by, and the rest of the series doesn't do enough in my opinion to justify the continued use of most of its miscellaneous humans in the first place. I know some of them may have their fans, but personally, I hope they don't become mainstays in future iterations. That probably won't be an issue, since the Alvin and the Chipmunks franchise has a habit of reusing archetypes and roles with different characters like Ian and Harry. So, in addition to the Chipmunks having more of a plot-driving force, I think recurring human characters should only be used sparingly, and with specific roles in mind. I get that some, like Miss Smith, are ones that we have to see often, considering that the school is one of the central locations in the show, but seriously, how many of us actually asked for episode plots to dwell on her as a character? Feel free to let me know in the comments. Do you think the CGI series focuses too much on the human characters? How should they be utilized? And who are your favorite or least favorite human characters across the series, or heck, even the whole franchise? And if you have any suggestions for future topics of Alvin and the Chipmunks Elaborations, leave those in the comments as well. You can also join my Discord server and follow me on Twitter. Links to both will be in the description. With all that said, I hope you enjoyed, have a nice day, and thank you for your time.